Laura, can you tell if he's recording or not? Okay.
Okay, we're going to call to order the Town of Niskayuna Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for September 9th, 2024. Ms. Bergami, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Laflamme,
Here.
Ms. Strain,
Here.
Mr. Khan,
Here.
Ms. Belofsky,
Here.
Ms. Gomes is absent, Ms. Gold,
Present.
Chairman Darpino.
Here.
And I need to turn it on. Thanks.
Next up is the approval of the August 26th, 2024 meeting minutes. Could I get a motion?
So moved for the minutes.
Moved by
Second.
Mr. Khan and second by Ms. Gold.
Yep.
Okay, are there any corrections or comments? Okay, I had none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next up, public hearings. We do not have any public hearings, so we'll move directly to privilege of the floor. Privilege of the floor is now open. Please state your name and address, and you may comment on any planning or zoning matter for the town of Niskayuna.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Milnick. I live at 901 Inman Road. Once again, this past weekend, there were 12 visible cars in the driveway and one parked car on the road at 1230 Milton Keynes Drive, a short-term rental in our town. This is a quiet, peaceful neighborhood, just like any other neighborhood in Niskayuna, and with your help, we can keep it that way. It is a shame that my neighbors need to worry about the safety of their young children. They can't play in the cul-de-sac where they live because we don't know who all these renters are. Short-term rentals should not be permitted in our town. It is not a good thing for our residents. It only benefits the owner of the property who is making a lot of money on these renters, and the renters are having these big gatherings. They're having a good time. If you feel this is right for the town, there needs to be the strictest regulations. I have read through the minutes since April and found on 3 occasions, April 29th, June 10th, and August 26th, the issue of limiting the number of permits for a zone came up for discussion. I have not seen it in this packet for tonight's meeting. I hope it is still being discussed. What about limiting the number of permits per neighborhood instead of per zone? Short-term rentals are not good for the integrity and safety of our town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Laura Scordino. I live at 1240 Milton Keynes. So I'm not sure like what you guys came to with your meeting that it seemed like we were headed in two very different directions. I still think that probably what's best for Niskayuna is to not have short-term rentals at all. But if the plan is to go forward with short-term rentals in residential areas, I completely agree that it needs to be as strict as possible. One thing that I've been saying is that I still think 8 people is too many. And I haven't really heard anybody kind of come back to why it's 8 or like why we're staying at 8. I think it's just too many. No family's 8 people. And you're just like, off the bat allowing people to bring multiple different groups of people.
Is the microphone on?
I'm not sure.
I can.
Okay, I can speak into it better. So again, I just think that we should go from 8 down to 6 or 8 even to 4 if it's going to be allowed in residential areas. And then the other thing that I think is important is to keep at least 7 days, if not adding even more than 7 days. Even if it's 7 days, that might, in the things that we've talked about, could somebody just extend the payment or, whatever to make it less per night and like finagle around probably. So maybe 7 days isn't enough. Maybe it needs to be 14 days, So those are the things that I wanted to say. First of all, I agree that if we can just keep it out of the residential altogether, do that. But I still think 8 is too many, go down. And then obviously keeping it hosted with people who own the house versus if they can just hire whoever, then that's just like, asking for no regulations of what's happening in the house. Because even an owner, if they're making $1,200 a night, can go downstairs, put their headphones in, and ignore the sound and get through the night. So anyways, I agree with trying to keep it as strict as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in attendance for privilege of the floor? Okay, Laura, do we have anyone online?
We have a number of people online, but I believe they're all applicants. Is there anybody online who wishes to speak under privilege of the floor? No, we're all set. And I didn't receive any emails.
Okay. All right. So as there are no other people to speak, we will be closing privilege of the floor. Next up is unfinished business. There is no unfinished business, so we will move on to new business. First up is Resolution 2024-31, a resolution for site plan approval of a tenant change to a Wingstop restaurant at 424 Balltown Road. Project leads are Ms. Strang and Ms. Belofsky. Resolution is now therefore be it hereby resolved that the Planning Board and Zoning Commission finds the above referenced site plan meets the requirements of the zoning code and previous site plan and zoning board of appeals approvals, and therefore hereby approves the site plan and tenant change with the following conditions. 1, code compliant signage for the property shall be reviewed and approved by the planning department. Any waivers or variations of code on proposed signage shall require a full planning board review at a future date. Number 2, prior to issuance of a building permit, final landscaping plan shall be reviewed and approved by the Niskayuna Tree Council. May I get a motion?
I'll make that motion. I'd just like to thank the applicant for their efforts and the proposed striping and the extra parking spaces.
A second.
Okay. And we have a representative from the applicant online. Oh,
Alex.
please come up to
Yeah,
the
please come
microphone.
I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Alex. I'm the name on the applicant, and I also work for the company that's opening. And I just want to say thank you for just for the first time, me getting kind of a peek inside of like local government in a way to see like how much Niskayuna cares about their community. And even though it might just seem like a crosswalk or parking spaces or landscaping, like it's bigger than that. And it all goes back to like serving the community. And I just wanted to say that, like, I don't know, it's just been really cool to be a part and get to watch it all work. So I don't know if I was supposed to say any of that, but I wanted to just say that.
No, we always welcome any kind of feedback, but thank you.
And then I don't know if Cherico was going to say something. I thought I heard his mic come off mute, but.
Hi, sorry, I just joined you right. I missed what you said early on. No, I don't have anything to say today.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, it looked like a complete package. So any other discussion from project leads or other
Welcome to
members?
the town.
Thank you guys so much. Oh, and we got our signs like adjusted. So they're all within all of the code. And whenever we're ready to send the plants to the tree board, those have all, like, we had them kind of like looked over just to make sure they're not invasive or anything and all that stuff. So thank you guys.
Great,
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Tommy, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Laflamme,
Aye.
Ms. Strain,
Aye.
Mr. Khan,
Aye.
Ms. Belofsky,
Aye.
Ms. Gold,
Aye.
Chairman Darpino.
Aye. And motion is approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
No. All right, next up is Resolution 2024-32, a resolution for site plan approval of a tenant change to Capital Cardiology at 1769 Union Street. There are no project leads, so I will read the resolution. Now therefore, be it hereby resolved that the Planning Board and Zoning Commission finds the above referenced site plan meets the requirements of the zoning code and previous site plan and zoning board of appeals approvals, and therefore hereby approves the site plan and tenant change with the following conditions. 1, any and all proposed signage for the property shall be reviewed and approved by the planning board at a future date. May I get a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Gold,
Second.
second by Mr. Khan. Do we have a representative for the applicant online?
Yes, you have Briggs Montero with Albany Met Online.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Montero. Package looked good. I think it was basically a recap of what we saw a couple weeks ago. I didn't have any comments on what was there.
This signage was denied by the zoning board, I believe. And the CN zone requires signage to come back to the planning board. So if they were to put signage, it still does need to come. I think the only thing that can be released is the monument sign.
Okay.
Yep.
And the use is consistent with both previous usage and with the zoning.
Yeah, yep.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, Ms. Bergami, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Laflamme?
Aye.
Ms. Strain?
Aye.
Mr. Khan?
Aye.
Ms. Belowski?
Aye.
Ms. Gold?
Aye.
Chairman Darpino?
Aye. Motion's carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Resolution 2024-33, a resolution for site plan approval of a tenant change, including new signage to Hudson Valley Credit Union at 120 Mansion Boulevard. Now therefore, be it hereby resolved that the Planning Board and Zoning Commission finds the above referenced site plan meets the requirements of the zoning code and the previous site plan and Zoning Board of Appeals approvals, and therefore hereby approves the site plan and tenant change and signage. May I get a motion?
I'll make that motion.
A motion by Ms. Strang,
Second.
second by Ms. Belowski. A representative from the applicant online?
Yes, sir. My name is Charles Thompson. I represent Hudson Valley Credit Union.
Oh, thank you. Do you want to give a quick recap of the project?
Yes, sir. Basically what it is, it's an acquisition between Hudson Valley Credit Union and Berkshire Bank, which is the existing tenant at the location. At the end of the day, basically what we're doing is we have a purchase acquisition between both parties, Hudson Valley Credit Union and Berkshire Bank, to assume business at the location for the identical purpose that it is now, will be a financial institution. We're basically purchasing the bank, we're purchasing the accounts, as well as taking on the employees that currently work there. So other than signage, nothing else is really going to change, other than a great financial institution that we're happy to join in this unit area.
So the signage that's proposed is on the front columns, centered where the previous sign is. Do you know if the previous sign was also backlit?
Whatever the existing signage, the way it stands and the way the application states, is exactly where the signage is today.
Okay.
So we're not changing anything other than the name, the lighting, the square footage on the signage, and obviously abiding by the code by square footage and what's allowable. It's basically one for one. And I believe yes, that it was existing backlit on that front signage on the column, and I believe on the side of the building as well.
And Laura, could you just pull up the picture of the side?
Yeah.
The
sorry.
side sign
I
as well.
zoomed in too much. Here it is.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Yeah, these signs are all conforming, right?
They are. Actually, Clark and I looked to see if they had needed variances in the past, and they did not.
Did not.
Yeah.
And basically, it's changing from one financial institution to another. Slightly different, but still within the zoning.
Yeah. I mean,
Usage.
just looking at some of the size and the side ones, but I think it's within the code, so.
Pretty straightforward proposal. Any other discussion items? Okay, great. Ms. Bergami, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Laflamme?
Aye.
Ms. Strain?
Aye.
Mr. Khan?
Aye.
Ms. Belowski?
Aye.
Ms. Gomes? Or Ms. Gold?
Aye.
Sorry. Chairman Darpino?
Aye, motion's approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Okay. Next up, moving to discussion items. And the first item we have is the amendments to the zoning code. So what we're going to do is give the board a quick recap of some of the information that we had. So between the public hearing, we had a meeting with Ms. Gold, myself, and members of the planning department to review not only the information that was given by the public, but feedback and other items that we had that we were tracking through this. So we're going to break this up into a couple different items here. So if you want to go to the first page, oh, perfect. All right, great. So there's four clerical items that I'm going to group together. I'll read them off by the page and the subsection, explain what they are, and then what I'd like to do is I'd like to get a vote on that just to clean that up internally. So the first one is on page 6, F1AI. This chart here had a mathematical error that had to be corrected. So what they did was they had to change the item so that the number of bedrooms match the occupancy numbers. And you can see where the thing, so basically what that did was it dropped it down to 7
occupants total.
as a max. Okay. So the next one was on page 7, and that's paragraph F3D. And the parking was changed from the space size from 20 feet to 18. And that was done to be consistent with what our current code is. So we figured it would be good to keep it the 9 by 18. The third one is on page 7, F6. And in there was recreational vehicles was added just as a clarification to camping. So there was some feedback on what considered camping, and we felt that recreational vehicles along with tents and other items should have that language included in there. Okay. And then on page 8, G3, that was a numbering issue where we had to change the number 2 to the number 3 just to keep it consistent. It jumped from 1 to 2 or 1 to 3.
Yeah, so we'll change 3 to 2.
Right. So those are what we considered either clerical or grammatical corrections. So I'd like to get some discussion on that. If there's any concerns?
Can I just ask, under 6 where there's, no overnight camping and tents, recreational vehicles, with my observation of a pop-up gazebo type tent, is that located somewhere in here? Is that addressed? Because that was on the side of the house that popped up. I don't know if that specifically is, if that would be, it doesn't sound like that would be encompassed in the number 6.
Number 6 is meant to address trying to extend the number of bedrooms. So if a tent or a recreational vehicle or something of that like were being used to increase the number of people that were staying at the rental property, then that would be illegal. But if somebody was like bringing a bounce house or like a gazebo tent or a gazebo, that is not specifically addressed in the code. The code does specifically say, though, that no parties are allowed in a rental.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. If there's no further discussion, I'd like to get a motion to amend these 4 items.
I'll move that.
Okay. Motion by Ms. Gold,
A second?
second by Mr. Laflamme. All in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Now, these are the action items that we have. The next section is the action items we have from the takeaway from the public hearing. So we're going to start on page 8, paragraph G1B. Correct. So the proposal is to strike that sentence because it's going to be redundant with the duration that we're going to have further into the discussion period here. Okay. So the next one is to back up to page 6. And that would be paragraph F1 III. And this is to add a sentence containing minimal rental duration is 7 consecutive days. So some of the feedback was the duration, not having just a single day or a couple days. The minimum duration would have to be 7 consecutive days. So open that one up for discussion.
Just to be clear, that's a new Roman numeral
It's a
III.
That would be
Right.
F1 III to add,
And it's for that reason that we're also going to remove
remove the one
the
previous
one
to it,
previous.
which
page.
had a 14-day.
It was 14 calendar days
Calendar
per year, so they're not necessarily in conflict with each other, but we didn't see the reason for needing to specify that it had to be rented for 14 calendar days per year. That was a carryover from North Elba.
So to discuss that further, we're expecting a minimum of 14 days rented in order to maintain the permit.
That's actually what the section is that we're talking about striking. But I mean, one of the reasons that we were talking about that is even if you were going to rent your house for 1 week, the code would apply. So North Elba essentially lets you rent your house out for 2 weeks of the year without permit.
Yeah, so I think to make it clear with Chris, right? We're not setting a minimum number of days that the place must be rented in order to keep a permit. Right.
That's right. So 1 day would require a permit for a short-term rental, whereas this code actually says 14 days are required in order to need a permit for short-term rental. That's a carryover from North Elba, and when we were discussing it, it doesn't seem to apply to Niskuna. That may be more of a bedroom community thing than, a seasonal community than a bedroom community.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Okay. The next one is on page 8, and it's G1I. And this was the proposal that Ms. Gold had, which was to remove RP from unhosted.
And my reasoning on that is that in the RP zones, the residential dominates. And in fact, the RP on Balltown has actually seen 2 professional uses eliminated, and they are both strictly residential at this juncture. And I think they deserve the same protection that we're giving other residential neighborhoods.
So the RP zone has 111 current units, correct, Laura? And this
111.
111, and the CN has a total of 27
That's
units.
correct. Yep.
So that was some backup information provided by planning.
By the way, Chairman DiRapino, just one procedural question. Each of these that we're currently listing, starting with the striking the 14, are we gonna vote on them as a group or
Actually,
individually?
we should probably vote on them. We should probably vote on them individually.
Individually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would actually go back to the strike.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So let's go back to page 8, G1B, and that's to strike unhosted sentence as redundant with a 7-day duration. So I'll propose a motion to strike that sentence.
Strike 1A1, I.
Correct.
G1B.
G1.
G1.
G1B.
G1B.
G1B, strike
Okay,
G1B.
G1. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it would
be removing the requirement that short-term rentals have to be rented for a minimum of 14 days
per year. That makes sense. But was I understanding you correctly? G1AI also being stricken?
We're
No.
going to vote on that separately.
Okay, but that is on the table to be discussed.
Yeah, to be
Mhm.
discussed.
Got it.
Correct.
We'll come back.
Okay. So B,
Just
I-
call for the vote, right?
I could see doing them together.
Well,
No, I think we should keep them separate.
we'll
leave them separate.
We'll do them separate. We've discussed
Not a
them
bill.
separate. Okay. So there's a motion with a second to strike sentence G1B. All in favor, state by saying aye.
I,
Any opposed? Okay.
so one other procedural question,
Okay.
Chairman DiRapino. Are we doing these by motions and seconds, or are we doing it by just you proposing and we voting by ayes and nays?
I was going to do it by motion and second for
Okay,
each one.
okay. That's okay.
The what? You were the second, correct?
I'll second it.
Okay.
If
I'll
we
second that.
get to the point where there's a split on the board,
Mhm.
ayes and nays, at that point, you may elect to have people vote by name as opposed to just ayes and nays,
Okay.
just for clarity of the record.
Okay. Okay, the second one is on page 6, F1, III would be to add a sentence of minimum rental duration is 7 consecutive days.
I'll move that.
Okay, moved by Ms. Gold,
Second.
second by Mr. Laflamme. All in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Third one is page 8. This is G1I, and that's a proposal to remove RP from unhosted. So, Ms. Gold, I'll let you
I move that, of course.
do that. Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, second by Mr. Khan. Open it back up to discussion.
Could you just clarify, you talked about that being on Balltown, where else, I'm not totally familiar where else that applies, Upper Union, or?
So RP
I'm not as
is
familiar with
mostly on the corridor along Balltown Road. The entirety of Shaber Drive is RP. Most of the single family homes that were adjacent to the old animal hospital are zoned RP. There's a small number of RP homes kind of adjacent to the JCC. And the churches on the intersection of Providence and Balltown Road, and there is a house right there on that corner too. That whole area is zoned RP.
Okay.
And both the vet and the chiropractor are gone.
Yes, right.
We approved for the vet's office to become 4 apartments.
Right.
And I believe the
Chiropractor, yeah, I
chiropractor
think you're right.
that was sold for solely residential use. The sign is gone, nothing new has gone up. It's been several months. By nature, it is a neighborhood, not a commercial zone.
And my only counterpoint to that, I think the reason why we chose RP and CN is that both of those zoning districts are, by their definition, a mixture of residential and commercial. And so when our purpose is unhosted seems to have the most negative impacts to neighborhoods, and by allowing unhosted rentals in an area that's mixed commercial, theoretically the commercial is going to have its own noise. So an unhosted, and I think we kind of all agreed that unhosted by definition is like almost a commercial use of the property. So we didn't want unhosted to be put specifically in residential zones, but if you look at the other zones in our code, single family homes aren't an allowable use in those zones. So these are the only zones that are designated to be a mixture of commercial and residential. And I, in a lot of ways, I understand what Leslie's saying. When I saw that all of Schwaber Drive was zoned RP, I think to myself, why? But I actually think that is a separate step. Like the town should go and say, why do we have RP here? And look at where the RP zoning is through the comprehensive plan updates and stuff like that. But my recommendation for purpose right now would be when we're picking unhosted, we're picking the only places in town that you can have a mixture of residential and commercial by definition.
And I would argue the equity issue, it's a residential area. The commercial uses are sorting out. I kind of worry about the big office building next to Craig School, which seems to be less use than it used to be, because, it's gotten very easy to find good parking there.
The tall one
Yeah.
on River Road,
Yeah.
2190.
Yeah, they've been having some changes too.
And I think I put it in the agenda statement. The CAC was reviewing this for seeker. The CAC actually identified the CN zone as problematic for unhosted because they were concerned that that's some of the only affordable housing units that we have in the town center overlay district, and so that could put pressure on those to become less affordable. I think that unhosted is tough. and it's not gonna kind of fit particularly well in any of the zones. But if we're just gonna hone in on the face of the code, these would be the two zones that I'd recommend.
Well, I really don't think it belongs in RP. I agree that I would like to see RP rezoned, except possibly those 2 office buildings on Balltown from River to Craig School. But other than that, it's residential and I'd like to see it kept that way. And clearly that's what the neighbors want. And that these buildings have been turned over to residential. My alternative would be to just take out unhosted altogether.
Which I don't think we can do.
I don't know. But to me, it doesn't make sense to say, well, if you're in R2, which was the underlying zone for a good part of the RP zone, you can't have unhosted, but gee, you folks can. And I will note that the new homes past Schwaber are not inexpensive homes.
It's only Schwaber that's zoned RP. The homes behind it are zoned R3.
But they're going to deal with the fallout regardless.
Hold on, the homes. behind
Amador
the
home.
Access road to Schwaber? Like the all the homes on Schwaber.
Are zoned RP.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when you go further,
Bergen and Espen are all zoned R3.
Jeez.
but actually they're built more like R1.
They're built like R2.
R2. Some of the lots are larger, but yeah.
None of the lots are larger.
I don't know. I'm drawn on this one because I do want to lessen the chance of us, just having exposure as a result of limiting it so much to one zone. But by keeping RP in the mix, it's going to target RP for unhosted. If someone's like, I want to own, and then it's going to take away more potentially affordable homes in an area. So I think I know what my answer would be.
Yeah, this was a compelling one.
It was.
Okay. So the motion is to remove RP from unhosted. So all in favor state by saying aye.
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 Are any opposed? Okay. The next item is on page 8. This is G2A, and that's the 3 that was changed to 2. So this is a proposal to change the zones CN, RP, and RR only. And that's
I thought it was actually going to be
Except R1, R2, R3.
R1, R2, and R3, just because that opens up to a little bit more.
Oh, that's correct. Okay. So that's Mr. Khan's?
Yep.
Okay.
Can you state that just one more time, just so I'm clear?
So G on page 6, right?
Mm-hmm.
Page 8.
Page 8,
G.
and it would be where the 3 is, it would be 2.
Mm-hmm.
And A, hosted short-term rentals is defined in zoning code section 220-4 shall be permitted in all zoning districts. And it would be only in
In all zoning districts except
Except.
R1, R2, and R3.
Right.
So it's just adding the phrase except R1, R2, and
got
R3.
it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I can go ahead and make a motion.
motion by Mr. Khan. I get
Second.
a second by Ms. Strang. Discussion?
Yeah, may I make a few comments? And I've spoken at length, and I am in full respect of the board. I'm just going to make this brief and not repeat and rehash things from before. There are several principles that motivated me to make that motion. One of them, I'm not covering them in any specific order, but I'm trying to zoom in, then zoom out. I think we should practice this code. I agree it attempts to be as rigorous as we can think of today, but there are unforeseen eventualities. To practice it with a phased approach, rural residential gives us space, literally, right, as a true residential practice to see how it is we're going to do. And I'll comment on what I mean by how we're going to do in a bit. I want to remind myself, others, that there's a comprehensive plan that makes us a fundamentally residence-based community. There's a wider meaning to residential other than just staying in homes, right? It's not just a physical home, there's a sense of community, there's a sense of neighborliness, a process where, as we've seen from what we hear about Milton Keynes, isn't that one specific example, and what others have mentioned in the past about Ruffner Road, right, it does lead to a sense of communal animosity. And there's a lot of animosity floating around in the world today with, dire consequences. So I'd like to call our attention that community is not just, or residential is not just residing, but it's residing in a way of that promotes community. We've raised before that I believe that the planning department and the town planner and their staff will always be able to address the needs and fulfill the needs and desires of our community. But this will definitely increase some number of complaints and other types of action that the planning department will have to do. Again, I'd be more comfortable phasing that in rather than having it something that we need to deal with everywhere all at once in all of our residential zones. And finally, constitutionally, we don't have an obligation to serve this activity. It is a practice in real estate and in renting that developed. We don't have an obligation constitutionally to serve it, right? When a homeowner comes here and purchases a home in a residential district, they agree to abide by the zoning definitions and effectively to live in that property. On this last note, it's a personal preference, and this is the first personal preference that I'll articulate. I've been on this planning board for a while. We've been sued several times in the time I've been here. I'd much rather lose in court than to unforeseeably change the character of our town by doing something that we will not be able to rein back. The one fundamental commonality of this board in all of the discussions we've had was that actually short-term rentals is a negative thing. We never came out explicitly and said it, but in all of our discussions and everything we tried to do with making the code restrictive, even the discussion we just had in the previous motion that was voted on, we do view short-term rentals as a negative thing. And so in summary, why should we enter a negative thing into law in a way that is unconstrained and untested? I believe this amendment that we're proposing allows us to at least run the experiment with how this would work in the town.
So, and I just want to make sure that the record is clear. What we're trying to attempt to do, even with your amendment, I think, is to allow for the peaceful, quiet enjoyment of property. If short-term rentals are done appropriately and they allow for the peaceful and quiet rental of the property, then that's fine. I think we just have to make sure that for the record, we're not characterizing a particular action as good or bad, but what we're trying to do is create an outcome where there is no harm to our community through our regulations. So, I mean, you could theoretically have a perfectly fine short-term rental, but it would have to, be regulated through our code in order to not negatively impact the neighborhood and have that peaceful, quiet enjoyment of your property, which you're all given as of right through your deed, through the state of New York. So I just
Thanks,
want to
Laura.
clarify that for them.
I'd also like to just second everything that Mr. Khan has said and thank him for that. But also bring to the attention to the board that during all of this process, not one individual has showed up to voice a positive view of these. And so I think that should be noted as well.
Okay, and then the only other thing that I just want to remind everyone about is that when we configured the whole thing to be unhosted and hosted, the idea is that the hosted rentals, when regulated properly, will have basically zero impact on the adjacent neighbors. When you exempt R1, R2, and R3 from an unhosted, you are removing 95% of all properties in the town of Niskayuna. And historically, the town courts these days do not side with municipalities. And when regulations get to the point where they are a taking of a right that you could have on a similar property, that becomes very problematic. And so I think one of the things you've heard from our town attorneys is that we would like to adopt a code that we feel strongly we could support in court, because if it is challenged, that could theoretically prolong some of the suffering that we've heard from the neighbors while that challenge is going through court. So we have recommended a balanced adoption of the code at this time so that we are comfortable with any challenges that would take place and could hopefully put them aside very quickly and start implementing this code to reduce the negative impacts on the properties. And the only other one thing that I did want to note is that I think one of the things that came from this recommendation is that separating the RR. So my concern is when we say that hosted can be in RR, but not R1, R2, and R3. And our purpose for distinguishing between the zones would be that RR zones are meant to be larger so that the larger zones can mitigate the issues that we've heard with the hosted rentals. Just in our data that we've collected, some of the smallest lots that we have in our entire town are zoned RR. So, and then there's also some very similar neighborhoods, like Covington Court and Milton Keynes. Like, I think if you were on Google Earth, you wouldn't know where you were standing. You wouldn't be able to distinguish if you dropped yourself on Covington Court and you dropped yourself on Milton Keynes. So I just want to make sure that we're very clear with our purpose. If we're going to separate out zones, like my personal opinion is, when we've done the hosted, what would be different about implementing it in an R1 zone versus an RR? And I think that distinction should be made very clear if we're going to draw those lines between a hosted on those zoning districts.
And I have a couple comments. One goes to the equity. I argue that RP residents deserve the same protection that we're affording to the other residential zones. I think they also, we need to be equitable amongst the ones where we do allow it and don't allow it. And I will note the RR zone was set up, and some of the properties, and I think that covers most of the very small ones, were already lots of record. But the intent of RR was also to help protect the land, because most of it is draining to the river and things like that. And we wanted to add protection for the wildlife there and for the river. So to me, opening that up when we're saying the other residential zones shouldn't be, is a problem. So I cannot support this. I'm sympathetic. I understand the issues, but I can't
So
support
just
it.
one last point I'll make, right? The logic of the last point doesn't make sense because because the statement is written right now allows it also in RR.
No, that is completely true. But if you are distinguishing between the R1, R2, R3, and RR, so like right now, we're saying unhosted is a commercial issue. And my recommendation to you would be to put it in both of the commercial zones, which is all right. You guys said no to that. But, the unhosted is commercial. So we're trying to put it in the mixed commercial zones. Hosted, so that we're not doing a taking, like you're trying to leave in a particular zone. But I mean, some of the things that we talked about, like, are we targeting a size of the property or something like that in order to mitigate why we're distinguishing? Why would hosted, why do we have to say that R1 is different enough from RR that it should no longer be allowed to have a hosted either? Like, the regulations need to be applied, by on the face to a zoning that makes sense. So you'd have to distinguish why you could leave in an RR.
Right, and the basis of it was not lots of record that were grandfathered in to RR, but the way our code stands today, it does give a minimum lot size for anything that is RR that's not of pre-non-conforming use. That's all.
Right.
And so you read about RR, it's got a clear distinction. So if someone wants to come and take a 80 square foot property in R1 and subdivide it into 4 properties, we would actually have to entertain that.
Agreed, but I'm just
Right, but
reminding
not
you
in
guys,
RR.
we just looked at the face of the code and took out RP. So if we're not looking at the face of the code for RR anymore, I'm telling you, 1/3 of the lots in the RR zone are smaller than 2 acres. In the RR zone currently are the smallest lots we have in the town of Niskayuna. So if we're not looking at the face and the intent of the zoning when we're saying what's in and what's out, and we're looking at what currently exists, how do you differentiate Covington Court from Milton Keynes? And how do you say all of the lots in RR are
And
big because we
and
know
again,
they're
for me, the
not?
distinction is that today, Covington Court is RR
Yes.
and Milton Keys is not.
Just be careful. be consistent with the way that you are applying your review of this code, please.
Any other discussion?
I have a hunch we're going to need to do this vote by name.
I was going to have Ms. Bergami call the roll.
Mr. Laflamme,
Nay.
Ms. Strang,
Nay.
Mr. Khan,
Okay, aye.
Oh, excuse me. I
Yeah.
retract that. I misunderstood. Please tally my vote as yay.
Are you,
Restate the amendment.
okay.
Yeah.
So
This is a change that we're doing.
this is a modification
Yep.
to change hosted short-term rentals as defined by zoning code section 220-4 shall be permitted in all zoning districts except R1, R2, and R3.
Yes, thank you.
So my nay is my vote.
And yes is mine.
And yay, aye is mine.
okay. Ms. Belofsky,
Nay.
Ms. Gold,
Nay.
Chairman Jarpino.
Nay. That is not adopted. The next two that we have are not part of this, but they are items that we will talk about. So if you go to page 1, where it summarizes into page 2, there is information that is part of deeds, and I'm going to ask Ms. Robertson here to help me add some of the language here. But we wanted to add a sentence that captured the information in the deeds about, the peaceful
Yeah.
enjoyment. There's a very specific sentence that we had earlier.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do was make sure that in our purpose, we were capturing the, in every deed that's written in the state of New York, when you purchase your private property, it allows for you to enjoy it in the quiet, peaceful manner. And it's a very specific language, and Clark and I were talking about it a lot. And we think it would be good to incorporate that language into the purpose. And where we think that it would make the most sense is right on the first sentence where it says, the purpose of this section is to regulate the short-term rental of dwelling units within the town of Niskayuna. And then we could just put a comma there, because then we could start listing it, that everyone has to promote peaceful, quiet enjoyment of private property, and then comma, and to establish comprehensive permitting regulations to safeguard the public health.
And I will move that.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And then the last one is an open discussion on the maximum number of permits. So this is an item that was been brought up multiple times, and not only in discussion, but also in the public hearing. So currently, we do not have anything in here that has a maximum number of permits. And I am going to propose that we do not include a maximum number of permits.
I will second that.
Okay.
I think it's an onerous burden on the planning department. I don't think we need it at present. If things change and there's a need, I'm totally willing to revisit it.
Agreed.
And I think part of the reasoning for this also is that there would have to be a listing that is maintained by the town, correct?
Yes.
If they had a permitted process?
You have to add a waiting list, essentially, with the whole process of how to apply for the waiting list and manage the waiting list.
It seems premature. I agree.
So I just want to articulate that I also support that we should not have a maximum limit. And the main argument for it is I believe that the planning department will see an undue burden due to hosted short-term rentals, and this would just be an additional one. So to minimize the taxpayer and planning department burden, I'll actually support that we do not have maximum limits.
Move the motion by motion.
Okay. All right. All in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Those were the 5 items that have been amended to this. So I did not have any other items that was part of our evaluation or notes from the public hearing. Does any other board member have anything that we might not have covered or wanted to discuss?
No, but I believe we need to call a public hearing.
Correct. Just wanted to make sure that we have covered everything before we do that. So the next step would be to call for a public hearing.
And I would add a tentative resolution to that.
Correct. So we'll have the planning department get that publication out. That will give the public another opportunity to come out and review the updates to the codes. And if there's any other information that comes up in that timeframe, you can pass that along to us in public forum.
Do we need to state that the resolution would be to recommend approval by the town board?
Yeah, that'd be
That
good.
would be the body
Yeah.
of the resolution.
Mhm.
But that's our intent.
Correct. All right, great. I want to thank everyone for their work on this. All the members that have taken a lot of time and gone through this. I know this has been one of the heavier lifts that we've had as a board, but also very, very important for the direction where we're headed.
And I do want to thank also all fellow board members for, maintaining a healthy debate. And I know the good of the town and our comprehensive plan in the long run. And this is what we are as a board, and we're a democratic body. And so I'm comfortable with decisions as they stand today.
Thank you.
And I would just reiterate that the process is that the town board will have its own public hearing as well.
That's true.
And the town board also has edit capability on this code,
Absolutely.
right?
Correct.
Mhm.
Okay. So there's no further discussion items. We do have a couple report updates. Turn that over to Laura or Clark.
Yeah, so Clark drew this up from the last meeting. The planning board had talked about a couple different things with the applicant for 929 Pierce Road. Clark got a quote from a TDE to review it when we get the date, if we were to move forward, which is $5,550. That's pretty standard TDE stormwater review quote. And he has initiated the review of the existing home by the Historic Preservation Commission. So hopefully we'll have more information on that. And we have not received any additional information from the applicant on whether or not they were able to get the additional strip, or they want to submit a different configuration of the lots at this time.
With the historic comment, the barn would be included in that, right?
Yeah, they'll review the property. And for 1045 Palmer Ave, Jengis and Clark had a really good meeting with Sandra following the planning board meeting, right?
Yes, right.
Yep. And then they sat down and went over the timeline with her. She's understanding of the time frame. We had compressed the timeline to the absolute maximum in case she had a reason to move forward very quickly. She said that she may not be able to get it in by that next zoning board date, but she does understand the next steps. So her next step is to get a full survey drawing that we can review and do the minor subdivision application. So she's working on that. The CAC has it kind of standing on their agenda so that they can be ready with a seeker recommendation when you guys need it. And because of that, a resident came to the CAC on their September 4th meeting and did express concerns over the poor drainage in the area of 1045. She said there's a lot of standing water, a lot of pooling. Some trees were taken down before and it caused more water. And so there's a lot of concern from the next door neighbor that more trees taken down or more impervious would be very detrimental to not only her backyard, but actually the backyards that are in Schenectady. She absolutely loves her neighbor, Sandra, and thinks she's a wonderful person and has no quarrel with her taking the subdivision forward. She's just very concerned about the water impact.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the kind of, so I did concur everything you said. I spoke with Ms. Griffin today and she concurs, right? She's still, searching for an engineering firm. So when I was out in the property, it was hard, this is the kind of input you need to get from the neighbors, right? It was hard to determine, the ground was dry, but it was a dry.
It's dry
period.
year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll have to, ensure that, what our water situation is there.
I think she may come to the next planning board meeting. She's lovely. You probably will hear from her, but I did want to mention she came to the CAC meeting.
Do we know anything more on what kind of house she's looking at? I know she wants one floor.
Right. one floor. She's current. So again, I want to thank Clark publicly for, presenting the paperwork and having that, making the process really clear. And, Ms. Griffin did confirm that it's really clear. So the key thing I think we decided in that meeting was that, whatever engineering and land surveying work she was going to put into it, we were going to kind of do it all at once. So understand
Okay.
what kind of structure she wants to put in. And if we go to the planning, if she takes it to the zoning board of appeals, we go in there with one package, right? Both for the two non-conforming lots and the structure that she'll have. based on
I'm
that.
wondering if a shotgun would work on that lot.
A what?
A shotgun.
Shotgun.
What's
Shotgun
that?
House? What's
A bungalow. So it's a single loaded
Yeah.
corridor that
Oh.
runs through the house.
There's a lot of them in Louisiana. And the idea is there's a hallway that goes from front to back. So you could literally shoot a gun
Shotgun through.
and have it go all the way
Louisiana.
through, and all the rooms are off that hallway. But the advantage is that it's not extremely wide, but it goes back deep, and it's a deeper lot.
Yeah, I'm
most.
sure. Hopefully,
So
hopefully someone makes the recommendation and she gets the engineering firm. They'll be able to do that. But the key thing for us is we're looking hopefully for like an application with both the lots and the structure on the new lot, all identified that we could then send to the zoning board of appeals.
So to summarize on our little architectural history, the French term is enfilade, which means in fire. Same thing.
What?
In fire, in
In
line.
fire.
It's a series of
fire in
rooms
line.
connected by a straight corridor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's
But yeah, that is an actual term used for the small bungalows that are downstairs.
my dad wanted to be an architect. He wound up in real estate, and I have some interest there.
And that's an interesting property. I still think that, we don't permit detached accessory dwelling units, but Schenectady does. And, the only thing is that she's got the lots, but, not to subdivide them because you would lose control of having those if that was the case.
Yeah.
I know
We-
she's looking to downsize, but for a longer term solution to the property, whoever the next owner is, those things should be considered as
Yep.
well.
That's really something that we have to keep looking at for the comprehensive plan.
Mhm.
is-
We have ADUs in the
We-
code,
Yes, we do.
but they're supposed to
Be
go when the
removed.
person who needs it is
Correct.
no longer there.
Yeah. And so you put a lot of money into an accessory dwelling unit and then you have to remove it and you can't rent it.
Mhm.
So that makes it like hard for, families. If there isn't like an actual like older parent or a special needs child, then it can't be an accessory care unit. They can't have their own kitchen and all that stuff. So yeah, I think that with more families, multi-generational, in order to afford the cost of housing, with the affordability crisis of the housing, we really probably need to look at the accessory dwelling unit.
And the
deeply.
issue is we didn't want it turning into unauthorized rentals.
That yes. But I can tell you actually, I've met with a couple people in town recently who feel very strongly that we need to look at affordability of housing in the town of Niskuna, and who also feel like Niskuna should be considering possibly a development moratorium during or while we're adopting our comprehensive plan.
I'm
That's
not
just
fond
it.
of moratoriums.
That's just the comments I've been
Mhm.
hearing. I actually would not be surprised if you got a couple comments from the
Yeah.
public under privilege of the floor about it.
Well, just explain as a new person, if she were to pursue the accessory dwelling, is that what it's called?
Right.
Accessory dwelling in Schenectady,
Mhm.
then she would still have to address the driveway situation, or that becomes moot because it's a shared driveway because it's part of an existing property.
From site plan, we would still review it,
right.
but Schenectady would then become
The lead.
The lead.
the lead.
And
for
the building she would build would have
Correct.
to be in that Schenectady side, which actually
Is where she
for further. No, so the Schenectady side is on the back of her property.
Right.
So it actually.
but she could potentially, I mean, that's where the water probably is too, but
Mhm.
Water.
potentially tuck something back there that is.
Yeah.
that
So
serves
she's
her-
aware that that's one of
She
her
is
options,
aware of that,
right?
okay.
I mean, we went through what the options were, and she chose to pursue,
This one.
this path
subdivision.
first. Right.
Does the accessory structure for the shotgun house best fit in an area that's Niskuna?
So I think her original plan was to develop a small one-story house towards the street on Palmer in Niskuna, but it would be a small house. On that side of the block, there are larger homes and two-family homes.
Yeah.
Opposite are very small bungalows.
Yeah.
So the building typology is there on the block. It's just that side of the block had more taller houses developed
Larger
on the street.
structures, yeah.
And I mean, she does, you can see it in last week's meeting. I have it up. The accessory structure will have to be in the Schenectady side. And like I said, it's
And that's where
it's a
the-
little bit of a tougher area to work with now, especially as you mentioned, right? There's a water issue.
Water.
Yeah.
I think that's right in the corner where the water ponds.
Yeah.
It's pretty tight back there too. I don't know what Schenectady setbacks are, but there isn't actually that much in the backyard that's in the city of Schenectady.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not, you could see it here from scale. It's pretty,
Pretty small. Yeah.
yep. It's just, it boggles my mind as to how a lot like that ended up being of that size, given all the lots around it.
I mean, the way that they typically happened is that somebody was a little more well-to-do and bought the one next to them and just made it their yard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are a number of them in Niskuna.
Mm-hmm.
Not that many though, because you
Yeah.
basically bought 2 buildable lots and then chose not to build on your next one.
And just for the record, or the parcel to the left of her was never developed before, correct?
No, that's been, as far as we can tell, because I can go back pretty far in the aerials.
Mhm.
It's always been a yard.
Yeah. That's been-
Any other report items?
Mm-mm.
Okay, great. Commission business from anyone? Okay. I had one thing. For long-term items, I was thinking that possibly if any of the board members had an interest in any of the other committees or other boards and wanted to be a liaison to them, that was something that maybe on a monthly basis or bi-monthly basis, you wanted to reach out if you had an interest in, like Leslie wanted to give an update on the comprehensive plan, and every now and then, or if somebody had an interest on jumping onto an architectural review board or checking in with zoning, it may just help us track some of the projects that we have and also kind of keep us in touch as planning members with some of the other committees and do a little bit of networking.
I think that's a good idea.
So if you have an interest,
And under
obviously-
reports, maybe we could just rotate which one was going to do a report on their board.
Sure. Or if you have a project that is going to other committees and, wanted to sit on that committee meeting and then bring that information back, we thought that might be helpful. And
Would you have a list of those?
Yeah, that's what
Yeah, I think it would be like tree council, complete streets, architectural review board, comprehensive plan.
But there's also some
CAC.
town meetings, right? The economic, you'll
Economic,
go to economic development. and-
Yeah, so a good one from that would be, there's a Grand Boulevard pedestrian safety improvement project that they're looking at, and it's a mixture of line striping for parking, possibly a bike lane, possibly developing something on the median. There's a clamoring for sidewalks, so there's a tree now.
That's
apparently,
complete streets, yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
complete streets, and what that came through the economic committee. It's not something that we're necessarily going to see here, but it may be something that we would have a little bit of an interest in, or just getting a little bit of information on occasionally. So we just see what else is going on.
Yeah.
So we just reach out to you, Laura, in terms of what one we want to be a liaison.
Oh yeah, I mean, I could send an email to the board with all the committees,
That'd
and
be
then you
helpful.
guys could respond which ones you were interested in.
Yeah, that sounds good.
That sounds good.
Because I attend a couple more meetings, and then we hear about an interesting project, and
Yeah.
you may ask a question and not know about it, or hear it from another neighbor.
Yeah.
And that'll be
Yeah,
just to
that
bring
would
some of the bigger ones
Right.
to our attention. Very great. That's all I had. So if there's nothing further, I get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, by Ms. Gold,
I'll second.
second by Mr. Khan. All in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, meeting is adjourned at 8:04 PM.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, everyone.
Go us.
Good job, you guys.